This is always a very popular session, and we have great speakers today. Lesley has been a speaker for us before and also is a Paul Miller alumni. I'm not going to ask you about the year. She covers the White House now for McClatchy. She came to Washington in 2006 as a regional for the Miami Herald and then also worked for the Bradenton Herald. Moved over to the White House 3 years ago. So she's going to talk to us from the perspective of somebody who's been on the beat for at least a little while. And Tamara Keith, also Paul Miller alumni, a little bit more recently, is the NPR White House correspondent. You started NPR in Washington with a different, did you have a?
I covered business.
She covered business.
And economics.
And now she's covering the White House with sort of that same economic focus to a certain degree, although I'm guessing that
events overtake what you do.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So does one of you want to start? I know you haven't talked about this.
Yeah, we haven't.
I think I said I would follow your lead.
Okay, all right.
So Lesley, take it away.
So I'll just start. Linda gave a little bit of my biography, but I came up to Washington for the Miami Herald to cover Congress as a regional reporter, which is actually a terrific experience for covering the White House because, as you soon find out, the White House is not as chatty, perhaps, as Congress is. So it's kind of good. If you guys are covering Congress, I don't know how many are regional reporters, but it is really good training because you just learn to talk to a bunch of people who will help you if you ever come over to the White House beat. It's a really interesting, fascinating beat that covers just about everything. You learn about domestic politics, you learn about international conflicts, and it's a lot of fun to do. It's also really difficult because they are not as forthcoming with information as other outlets might be. And you may run into that as you're covering different agencies and finding that it's hard to get information out of them. It's just as hard at the White House.
Yeah, and I would say a good case in point of this example came last night when suddenly lots of organizations had the new EPA carbon numbers. And I emailed my contact at the White House who deals with these issues, and he was like, oh yeah, we're not doing anything until tomorrow, and sorry, can't confirm any of it. And clearly, Democrats on the Hill got a briefing, and Democrats on the Hill talked to reporters. So that's how that happened. So having contacts on the Hill is hugely helpful. So what I did is I covered business and economics, sort of during the height of the financial crisis, and then got recruited over to cover Congress, which I did for about 2 years, but a big part of that was the campaign in 2012 and maternity leave. And then just in January, I moved to the White House. And then in February, I spent the entire month in Sochi covering the Olympics. So I feel like I haven't really had quite enough time in any of the jobs I've had. But my hope is to actually spend more time at the White House than I spent in the last 2 or 3 jobs. And I'm continuing to spend time on the Hill because, White House, not super chatty. Unless they want to be.
Right, and one of the things a lot of people talk about is covering it from the outside, talking to members of Congress, talking to the advocacy groups, like the president this afternoon will be talking to the American Lung Association about the climate change initiatives, and so those are really good to have good contacts among those. We found last time that a lot of people like to know basically like what do you do when you cover the White House? You've probably all or many have seen West Wing, and, which I have actually not seen. But
I used to love that show.
It's not a disqualification, I guess, for covering the White House. But a lot of what we do is basically trying to find out what they're up to and talking to people. And we generally go to the daily briefings that you probably see on TV and try to get answers to our questions. We get many responses, but not necessarily answers.
And often we get the same response again and again and again with very little variation, except as I just told so-and-so.
Yeah, which is what you'll find. If you ever watch the briefings, you'll find the briefing is about, 7 or 8 rows of seats. And in the front, you'll have the TV networks and the cable networks. And they're there because they often use the exchange with the press secretary on TV to illustrate it.
They need the cutaway of themselves on TV asking a hard question. Now, it could be the very same hard question that the other 3 people in the front row just asked.
Right.
But they totally have to ask it.
Yeah, and because they want their own person asking it. So a lot of us who sit further back will get a little frustrated because we will hear essentially the same question asked, 10 or 15 times. So it's always a struggle, and it is for the press secretary as well, to go beyond that first row of people and to get to, like, if you guys wanted to come, you had a question for the press secretary, it's open to reporters, anybody. You just have to get in touch with the White House press office and, find out, get scheduled in, get cleared into, and you could come and ask a question. Generally, you'd want to probably email them ahead of time to let them know that you might be there and that you might have a decent question. I did that once as a reporter for the Miami Herald because we covered a lot of Cuba and Haiti issues, and so I had a Cuba story that I was working on, and so came to a briefing and actually didn't get called on, but it was interesting to find out how it worked.
And which row do you sit in?
I'm in the 3rd row.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm in the 2nd row. I feel like the 2nd row is a little challenging. I mean, it's not that challenging, but it's a little challenging because, like, I'm on TV right behind those guys, and I have to, like, not roll my eyes or look completely disinterested. Or,
because the cameras are on you.
You can't doze off. You can't, like... So I've, like, timed my lunch so that I'm not in some sort of food coma during the briefing.
Yeah, and you entirely can't go, like, ugh.
Right.
Because that, like, I mean, you'd be on...
And you can't, like, laugh too hard because that also could
you have to, you have to sit there with, like, an engaged but neutral face. So you're kind of like, I work on it all the time.
I do too.
Thinking, like, because if you watch the briefing and then they'll like glom onto somebody and you're like, that was me. And you don't want to be sitting like this either. Like, you tweet or send emails, they asked about this story that we're covering, so you want to tell your editors, we might want to know about this, but you don't want to sit the entire thing looking like you're...
Yeah. So it's an interesting challenge.
Yeah.
And people on Twitter are constantly sending me screenshots, which I find concerning.
I haven't had that happen yet, fortunately.
Yes. Screenshots of me either
I saw you at the briefing.
Yeah, like, I can see you on TV. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that happens. And I got a question about, I had been on the job for about a month, and I started in the height of the fiscal cliff crisis in 2011. And it was a great time to start because Congress was at the White House all the time, members of Congress, and the president was sort of driving things between negotiating, and it was very, just so much happening. And the president at one point had a press conference, and I got a question in, and that's a pretty interesting experience to go through because you sit there for 45 minutes to, like, developing the question that you want. What they do is kind of give a heads up to make sure that you're going to be there because they have a list of, they want to get newspapers, they want to get radio, they want to get cable, so they'll have a list of what outlet. They're not calling on you in particular, they're calling on your outlet. And so they'll send an email that says, you're going to be at the press conference today?
Yeah, like, who's going to be in the chair today?
Yeah.
Didn't you just get your first question?
I did. And yes, I got an email that said, are you going to be at the briefing today? And I was like, uh-oh, I know what this means.
And it's really, and for TV reporters, I think it's probably, like, it's so much easier because they're on camera all the time. But for us who are not necessarily on camera, it's a little terrifying.
Yeah. Because people are watching these things.
Yeah.
So did you at that point discuss with your editor?
Yes.
We're going to get a chance. What do we want to ask about?
Yes. So I called my editor and I was like, I think I know what this means. And at that point, we didn't even know that the president was coming to the briefing, but they had made the briefing later in the day, so we kind of figured. And then I sent around emails to the foreign desk and some of my colleagues on the national or on the Washington desk, and sort of brainstormed ideas, and then came into the briefing with maybe like 6 questions on my laptop. What you don't know is if he's really going to call on you, and when he's going to call on you. So in my case, the big news of the day was Ukraine. He was announcing Obamacare numbers, And there was also a bit of a spat going on about immigration with Eric Cantor. And so, first question goes to the LA Times, and she asks about Ukraine. So I'm like, all right, well, I probably shouldn't ask you another Ukraine question. Mark those off. Those were good. And then he calls on L'Opinion, who asks about immigration. So mark the immigration question off my list. So then I was like, all right, I guess it's back to Obamacare. And that's what I ended up doing. And then after me, he called on Politico, and that reporter asked about both Obamacare and Ukraine. I was like,
Yeah.
the old double question.
Yeah. Yeah, and you always try to get like a couple questions in as well.
Or like a follow-up, or
Yeah. I got a question at the press conference with Angela Merkel and Obama, and I got a couple questions into him, but for some reason I had like 5 questions for her, none of which she answered. But by the time she had finished, because she's through a translator, the mic was already over it. You can't grab the mic back and be like, Chancellor, you didn't answer my questions.
Well, and with the foreign leader press conferences, typically each country gets like 2 questions.
2, yeah.
But it's really 2 people allowed to ask
Right.
as many questions as they possibly
Yeah,
can.
so you
It's sort
try
of a
to like
game.
stack a bunch of questions in there to get the most maximum. And you want to get news, and you don't want to necessarily ask something that's like completely off the wall, that like it's a personal story that you may be working on. You really don't want to use that opportunity, especially like in the foreign leader press conferences. It's sort of like it's almost a collegial thing where they're talking about Ukraine, and if the first question should kind of stick to you don't go in and sort of say, well, by the way, down in Miami, the city councilman was indicted, and what do you think of that? So,
I was thinking maybe I don't know what your weekend was like, but mine was kind of weekend interrupted a little bit.
I got to plead friend in town weekend, so.
Yeah, it ended up being kind of a mess, and this is sort of the life of a White House correspondent often. So I'm trying to remember what happened Saturday.
That was a Bo Bergdahl.
Saturday was Bo Bergdahl. So Saturday I was supposed to be the radio pool, but
Yeah, we should tell them about pool.
Why don't you talk briefly about the pool so everybody
Okay,
knows how
let's do that.
Yeah.
I've only been pool like twice, so you better explain.
They're, because the entire press corps would like to be everywhere where the president is at every minute and see what he does, it's impossible. So what they've done is a situation called the pool, and it's about 13 people. They'll have a representative of the print, I'm print, representative of radio, representative of TV, and the wires.
And the TV has like a camera person and a sound person
Yeah.
and a producer.
So it turns out to be about 13 people. They'll have different pools. They have an in-town pool. So if the president has an event, like say he has a visiting prime minister of Turkey is in town, the pool, not everybody can fit into the Oval Office, but you really hope if it's in-town pool that you have a visiting dignitary and you get into the Oval Office just because you're in the Oval Office.
I still haven't been, except on like a tour.
It's great. I've only been like 3 times, and it's cool to be in the Oval Office and there's the foreign person. But at any rate, you're sort of responsible for sending out to everybody what happened, what you saw, what they said. Did they look, did they sit there and kind of glare at each other, or did they seem friendly? What was their body language? That sort of stuff. You get back to the pool reports.
And I send the audio.
Yeah, and everybody sort of is doing their own. The wire people send to wire. The print one are the ones that somehow get out to everybody, which I'm not sure how that has happened, but that's the one that you kind of read about if you see things like in a White House pool report. Those go out pretty broadly. We also have a travel pool, which is really amazing. You can be in out-of-town travel, and if he's just doing a trip to New York or to California, I got on September, the 10th anniversary of September 11th, I was the travel pool. And so you go to Andrews Air Force Base and you get on Air Force One and you are there pretty much all day. We went up to New York, flew up to New York and took helicopters over to Ground Zero and, covered his speech, and then flew to Shanksville, or flew to Pittsburgh, took helicopters to Shanksville. It was really amazing day. So some of the stuff that you get to do, and often I covered the some of the 2012 presidential campaign, and when the president was campaigning and you get to be pool, is really cool because it's often the only time that you ever get to see the president. I mean, we can go months without ever seeing, not months.
Until last Friday when we saw him twice in one day.
Yeah. But if you're pool, you get a good chance to see him. Like, I've been
really up close.
Yeah, I went in Iowa once, I think it was Iowa. He went to like a shaved ice shack. And it was like, he's actually interacting with people. And and I got to do his pool duty a couple weeks ago where he went to a baseball game. And so you actually get to see, which is just kind of nice because if you're covering people, you kind of just want to get some sense of who they are and what they're like.
Yeah, I recently did a pool trip when he went to Arkansas to tour storm damage. And that was really interesting. I mean, it was like one of the craziest days of my life because I had never flown on a helicopter before. I hadn't flown on the real Air Force One before. So there were just all of these things that all happened in one day, and then you hop in these pool vans.
And you're actually working. And
right.
Yeah.
And then so we were sitting outside of this fire station or something where he was meeting with survivors and first responders, and then vans. So he's in there for like an hour. Then all the vans whoosh us off to this neighborhood where he walks down the street, and there's destruction all around, and then there's just sort of like random people standing in their driveway. So I think had just sort of been in the neighborhood, and then they were told the president was coming, and please stand right here. And so then he does this quick press conference, and I dropped out of the pool at that point because NPR didn't want to pay thousands of dollars for me to go and not get audio of him at fundraisers in California.
That's the other thing. It's incredibly expensive to cover the White House for the news organizations. We pay for all the trips.
Yeah. So I dropped off in Arkansas and hung out in this neighborhood a little bit longer. People start coming back into the neighborhood because now the president is gone. And this woman comes in who survived the tornado, whose kid was killed in the tornado, who had met with the president, and I got a very different story, like a story that there's no way you could possibly have gotten in the bubble, ever. Right. Which was a valuable lesson to me in sort of the dangers of being in the bubble. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was a lot of value in being in the bubble, in helicoptering over the damage, and being able to be there in that cul-de-sac. Right. But dropping out was the best thing I've done in a long time.
Yeah.
Because I actually was able to get a sense of what those conversations were like with the president behind closed doors while we were sitting in a van baking in the car.
As opposed to a readout from the administration, which would be the president expressed his condolences.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was just far more emotional than, anything that happened in public view with the president.
Yeah.
So it was a really valuable, interesting lesson.
Tamara, can I ask you, when you dropped out of the pool, two things. How did you get home? I mean, suddenly the helicopter's leaving without you. You're there.
Oh, this is kind of it's not hilarious, but it's semi-hilarious.
So that question, and then the second one is, when you drop out, do the people who remain in the pool pay more?
Oh no, not on Air Force One.
No. Okay.
And basically there was no radio value in the California fundraisers. So, I mean, I think that for the purposes of the other radio pool people, nobody else was planning to send someone on the whole trip. So the value they got from having me on part of the trip was enough to make it worth it for the pool. So how I got home was kind of fun. I mean, it was premeditated dropping out of the pool. So
It's funny that once you do get out, because then you're like, what? I have to go through security at the airport? Are you kidding
What is
me?
this?
Although you do at Andrews, actually, so I shouldn't say that.
And I have TSA pre-check now because I travel so much.
Yeah.
So I'm like, whenever I don't have pre-check, I am just like, what is this? So first I had to get from the cul-de-sac to somewhere where a car could pick me up. So I ended up convincing somebody I interviewed to give me a ride to a Sonic. And then I hung out at a Sonic for like an hour and a half logging tape and drinking slushies. And then like a limo picked me up because I had to,
Car service.
Yeah, car service, because I was in Valonia, and that's nowhere near anything. There are no rental car places in Valonia, but there is a Sonic. And so then he drove me like the hour and a half back, dropped me off at the hotel, and then the hotel had an airport shuttle. But it was like, trains, planes, automobiles,
Yeah.
helicopters.
Because we'll do that a lot when we cover.
Minivans.
I was going to mention one of the benefits of the job is the foreign travel, which is unbelievably expensive if you go on the foreign travel. So a lot of our outlets will go unilaterally, which is to catch up. We'll travel commercial and catch up with. So this year alone, I've been to Rome, Saudi Arabia, and Tokyo. And that's just because we travel unilaterally. So I only did like part of it. But that's also a huge perk of the trip and can lead to some interesting travel situations.
And some good miles.
Yeah.
Just curious, like in a 2-week time or whatever, how do you measure your success? Like, what's a really good outcome for you? And I don't mean like breaking the story of the year, but just like, in a given month, what sets you apart from the dozens of other folks that are also in the pool getting the same information a lot of times?
I'm still high off of my tornado victim. I my goal is to at least once or twice a week do a story that I feel like says something or is meaningful and is something that I would actually be interested in hearing. Because I guess I shouldn't really admit it, but a lot of the woe is the administration stuff just bores me to death. And so if I can do a few stories, 4 or 5 stories a month that I think are really fun and interesting, that's a win. And we like to think about it as, they're going to leak to the New York Times if they're going to leak to someone. So instead
AP.
or AP. So instead of trying to break news, we're trying to break ideas. Something like that.
And give some sense of the presidency, to give some sort of historic sense of the time that we're in now and who this president is and what his administration is doing, to give sort of a bigger picture sense than just always a daily story, but which is always the sort of constant struggle, because sometimes the daily story, I'm a newspaper reporter, daily stories are a blast and fun. So.
Oh, yeah.
But I think that's probably it, to sort of put it in context and give some sense of where we are and what's happening. And
yeah, and daily stories are kind of like candy or something. It's fun, it's over at the end of the day generally. You just move on.
The adrenaline of a daily is hard to beat.
And often I'm done earlier on a day when I have a daily.
How do you get selected to head the pool, and how, when you rotate through, is it based off of your availability, or how does that work?
I think it's different for...
Yeah, the in-town pool is basically organizations that have signed up to do it, and you have to sort of have a number of people available to do it. Like, I know the regional reporters, actually, if you're a member of the Regional Reporters Association, they are in the pool. And so, and that's based on availability, and the White House will send out a schedule about a day before. They send
I
out
just got it yesterday.
For the month, and so it will have the slot, and it will say, like, ours will say McClatchy newspapers, and so somebody has to show up that day, and that's no matter what else is going on, you have to have somebody there.
Yeah.
And then the travel pool is based on is who can afford to and who pays and who goes on the trip. It's what do you call it? Routine travelers make up the pool, which is getting smaller and smaller as newspapers cut back. And
Yeah.
do you want
A few weeks ago, I went to an event at GW about diversity at the White House in terms of coverage, people covering the White House, obviously not being historically very diverse.
Right.
And one of the things that was talked about was just, what if the White House press secretary were a woman? And obviously, Jay Carney's no longer there. I was just wondering, sort of.
He's still sort of there.
He's stepped down, and so I guess my
And it didn't go to Jen.
question is sort of slightly related to that as a peg, but just sort of well, I don't want to say I was disappointed, but I was wouldn't it be interesting if they had put Jen Psaki or somebody,
Yeah.
a woman in that position to really kind of make a statement about.
I mean, a woman has done that job before.
Yeah, but just sort of somebody.
I'm not
within
defending them, but
within
it wouldn't have been the
within
first
the
one.
Obama White House. I guess one of the things that came up with that event was just that they're women historically, and of course people of color historically have been sort of shut out of the White House up until now, So what, I mean, can you just kind of talk a little bit about sort of diversity in the
Right,
White
and
House press pool as far as you've seen it through the evolution of your
Yeah, I mean, I think
the
we in the
effect?
newspapers and in broadcast and in radio could do a better job to begin with, so that when the press secretary, whether he's a white male or whatever, looks out at the audience
Yeah.
or out at the briefing room, he sees more people of color and more women. We have not done a very great job at that, and we have a really the White House Correspondents Association celebrated its 100th anniversary this year. And it's one of the things, I have to do a disclaimer because my boss is the president, so I can't say anything bad about the association. However, it has an incredibly checkered past. They
Yeah.
tried to write this year, or at least make a nice step towards, they gave a scholarship in honor of Harry McAlpin, who was the first black reporter to ask a question of a president. However, that was despite the fact from the White House Correspondents Association doing everything it could to keep him out. They did not want him to ask a question. They never let him join the organization. I mean, it was just a good old boys, clubby male organization. And I don't know how different it would be, because I think that whoever you are, if like for the spokesperson, I think that whoever that is just serves at the pleasure of the president and the
Yeah.
administration, and just does basically, like, I don't
They
think,
just say what they're supposed to say.
yeah,
It's like,
I don't think that would be any different. I think we could make it a lot different. I mean, there's been days, if you watch the briefing room, it'll be like all guys
dudes.
in the
All
front
dudes.
row.
Oh my
All
Yeah.
white dudes.
Except for the Julie Pace.
Julie Pace
in the-
often.
Yeah, yeah. And CNN has
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Brianna's not there anymore, but now there's a new woman.
yeah, Michelle Kaczynski. Yeah.
And then there's Kristen Welker.
And Kristen Welker. But other than that, it's
and then in my row, sometimes the Post has a woman.
yeah.
And we have 2 women and 1 man who rotate through.
And we have 2 women at McClatchy.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I walk into the press briefing room and I look around, I don't feel like I did covering the Olympics. Like, I don't feel like I'm the only girl in the room. I feel like women have I mean, that's not really diversity, but women at least are pretty well represented in the press corps, not as well represented in the front row.
Yeah.
And then I guess when I went to the briefing room once, and just sort of like hung out with, like when I used to work at AP, one of the camera guys just kind of introduced me to everybody. And I think one thing that kind of struck me was sort of like all of the sort of like big, beefy camera guys are all these like old school, like burly guys. Well, there were a couple.
No,
from
they're not
Fox,
that
surprisingly.
white.
There was
Yeah.
actually a couple from Fox I
Yeah.
was surprised were like, sort of like there were all these
And there's
like,
some-
sort of football player type looking guys. Maybe not all white, but just sort of. It just sort of struck me as like, where were the women in that more technical sort of camera person capacity?
There
that-
are.
Yeah, there's a few.
Oh,
There's a
right.
number.
Yeah.
Maybe it just happened to be the day that I was there.
Yeah,
It was just
I
like-
mean,
And a lot
there
of-
are actually a lot of people of color and a lot of
Yeah, and a lot of the producers are women
Yeah.
for,
Yeah.
for some of the
Yeah, I
networks,
know
and
some of the
carrying
producers.
some of the, because
Yeah.
sometimes there's like women, who are like my size or smaller, and,
Yeah.
Yeah,
carrying
I
a
think
lot
it
of
could've
stuff.
been
I'm
the day
like,
that I went
wow.
there, and I was just sort of feeling very sort of, I don't know, just like
Yeah.
just feeling like it was just a very homogeneous sort of.
I
space.
don't feel that way.
No.
I mean, it actually, really coming from covering the Olympics, where you'd walk into a press file and be like, "Wow, I am the only woman here," to coming to the briefing room, it feels a lot more diverse.
Other question. I've
Yeah.
heard that this White House administration is one of the most adversarial when it comes to dealing with the press. Is that something that you have also noticed?
Well, this is my first one.
Yeah, it's the first administration that I've covered, so I can't like compare it to anything else. But everybody talks about how it's difficult to get anything from them. There's obviously all the cases of them going after journalists in more cases than any other president in history.
And you don't cover the White House if you don't get some sort of angry phone call from somebody at some point being like, "Why didn't you consult us on this?"
Yeah, even like tweeting.
Yeah.
like you're
Well, especially
tweet.
tweeting. Yeah, my colleague got an email that was like, "You tweeted about the president citing poetry as if this was something new. We would like you to know that the president has cited poetry on 8 other occasions." I don't know if
Yeah.
they were kidding or not. I think they were kidding. I think they must have been kidding. But like, actually, no. They really monitor what we're doing. But you know, Nixon. I feel like every administration, it's an adversarial relationship. Sometimes more than others. And you know, like if White House correspondents weren't whining and complaining about the White House, then it wouldn't be White House correspondents covering the White House.
Right. It's also with the 100th anniversary of the Correspondents Association, they've had a number of programs showing sort of White House correspondents through the years, and it's really fascinating how wide the gulf has gotten between like just being there and now being pushed. We're incredibly lucky and will like fight to stay where we are in the White House. I mean, there have been times where they've wanted to like renovate. I mean, our working conditions are, we're both in the basement, and the basement, I mean, we honestly work in a basement, and it floods, and
I think there's
said
mold.
to be rodents, and I mean, it's not a pretty place, but it's in the White House, and so we fight to stay there because that's the only place you can like walk upstairs and at least, you know, grab somebody and say, I have a question and can you help me out with this. But in the past, it used to be, I can't even remember which president it was, but the reporters were allowed in the actual like West Wing areas, and they could like kind of sit in the lobby and wait for like the, you know, I always say minister, the Secretary of Agriculture or the, you know, whoever to walk by and be like, oh, you know, why were you talking to the president? And now we have to watch from, you know, with binoculars basically, and see them in the parking lot. So it definitely has been get the press further away.
Yes.
There was a swimming pool down there.
Yeah,
There still is.
There still is.
But it's full of all of the like routers and stuff.
All the technical stuff.
It's just
Yeah. It looks like the room that you have where you keep all your computer stuff. That's what it is now, but it's a swimming pool. Yeah, the tile
and the
is
tile's
still
there.
Yeah, with like everybody's name.
Yeah, I
crammed
still
onto
haven't
it.
signed it
I haven't
yet.
either. I think I'm
Oh
gonna
my
wait
God.
till I leave.
Okay.
There's
Yeah,
hardly
Ari
any
didn't.
room.
Yeah, Ari didn't sign it until
Yeah.
he left. My colleague, who I
Yeah.
replaced. But our interns went and signed it.
Yeah, I know. I always.
Like-
yeah.
They were short time.
Yeah, they won't get another chance.
You're talking about the place that you work that's not the briefing room and it's not that little reporting quarters behind it.
No,
No.
That's
we
what
are in the
floods?
basement.
We're downstairs. We're like, the briefing room is here, and then there's reporting areas in the back, and there's I love it, they call it the lavatory,um because it's the bathroom and the cafeteria together. And then there's a basement area down there, and there's a lot of outlets that have space in the
And there's
basement.
flooding.
Well, the women's basement, the women's bathroom.
Yeah.
It feels that way. No, the women's bathroom, like when it rains heavily, water has been dripping down, and there was like a bucket. I walked in one day, and there was a bucket, and then there was just like water everywhere because the bucket was not actually catching the leak.
But it's an old building. I mean, it is the White House. It's a historic building. I mean, you're basically every day working in a place that's a national monument.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Like if you actually pause and think about it as you're walking in, it's like, wow, I am walking into the White House today.
Yeah.
Some days I forget. Sometimes I remember.
Yeah.
Sometimes then I'm like, oh, and it's a terrorist target.
Yeah.
But
Were you gonna?
did you?
I had a question about sourcing.
Mhm.
I cover Congress mostly, and I feel like it's more obvious like who you need to source with if you're covering Congress. When you are assigned the White House beat, like who do you need to make contact with right away, and what are your steps to do so?
It depends on where you're coming from, and if you're coming in from like a regional perspective, they have a whole regional, or at least I haven't covered it for a while regionally, but usually they have it like separate down by regional groups, and that's like a good contact person. So the spokespeople, and other than that, anyone.
Anyone who will talk to you.
Anyone who will talk to you is a great person to source with.
And continue to have your congressional sources.
Yes, totally continue to have your congressional sources. You stay on every press release that you ever get on more. Advocates, anybody, if you see that the National Association for Pineapple Growers was at the White House, like get to know that person if they met with the president, and they're good to talk to.
Yeah.
When the president made his surprise trip to Afghanistan Memorial Day weekend, like logistically, like how did all that work? And
I
how did you
sort
make a
of know.
surprise
Oh,
anything?
good.
Yeah. So, I hope this is relatively public. My colleague Scott Horsley was on the trip as the pool. He basically got a call on Friday that said, come into Jay's office, and you're going to be going somewhere Saturday night and you can't tell anyone you're leaving. He was allowed to go home once. On the way home, he picked up an international air card. And then at night, he drove to Andrews and they flew out in the dark of night. It was a surprise. My friend, who was also on the trip, wasn't allowed to tell her children. It's crazy. And Scott, my colleague, called me and said on Saturday and was like, hey, I might have some embargoed audio that I need you to move to the pool server so that it could be shared widely. And I can't tell you anything more. And so could you just like take your laptop with you to the park with your kid? And I was like, okay, what's the news? And he got really weird and he was like, I can't tell you. Which was really weird. And if I was like halfway more savvy, I would have figured out with thought like, oh. Right. But instead I was like, Scott's being really strange. And so then they were there. And then they made it public. But these trips have all been surprise trips.
Yeah.
And they truly have been surprises.
Yeah, because everybody else, I mean, either I woke up or I saw it, I get the pool report, and I was like, whoa, it's in Afghanistan. I had no idea.
Oh, that's what Scott was talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's pretty intense.
Very closely held.
Very closely held, for security reasons.
Yeah, it's like, that's almost reassuring that it's very closely held.
Yeah.
Is he like being monitored? Like, is somebody listening to him talk to you? Hey.
No, I don't think so, but, I mean, it's a very serious responsibility. And that's how we get access to those things, is by taking that responsibility seriously.
Yeah. And it's like anything else. The more people they tell, I mean, just the more chances are somebody would, something would happen.
My friend's 8-year-old would blab it at soccer or something. So they,
well, in this town, you never know who's playing, the kids are playing soccer with, so.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, you've talked a little bit about some of the perks of covering, executive branch there. I was wondering, how do you balance like the ethics? It sounds like you pay for a lot of the trips and stuff.
We pay for everything.
Pay for everything, and that's that. And there's not too much that really or even beyond that, like because it is sort of a glitzier appearing beat. It may always seem like that to you guys on the inside, but how do you sort of bring Obama down or whoever's president to be at a not to put the executive on a pedestal or anything,
I am just going to answer the part about it being this like super awesome, high profile job, which is like, it is the worst, best beat.
Yeah, totally.
In America, it is a really tough job, and it is really tough to do it well, and you constantly have a target on your back because you're reporting on the White House and people have expectations of you.
Right. And you're never doing it right.
And you're never doing it right. You are never, ever doing it right.
In every story, there's like a gazillion ways to tell it and a million different audiences. And so it's a constant struggle to try to figure out exactly what you're saying in terms of, for a newspaper, we have like a different audience, and that struggle between, you could do nothing but write daily stories because there's so much that comes out of the White House and so much that they're doing. But that's, you'd lose it quickly.
So I mean, there's the glamour of getting to fly on Air Force One. It's not like we're watching basketball with Barack or anything, I mean, it is really neat, but they're not doing us a favor.
Yeah, and you're also always on. Like even when you're on Air Force One, there will be, if you're like heading somewhere on a trip, on the beginning of it. In fact, the reporters will say like on the foreign trips on Air Force One, You just have to always be on. It's not like you can sit, like you get on a flight here, you can sit back and have a cocktail and do whatever. I mean, yeah, you're on Air Force One, which is really cool, and the seats are big, and
But they don't
it's like-
recline.
yeah, and and you don't know when you're gonna be if you're trying to like catch a nap or something, you're gonna be woken up. Something happened. There's gonna be a briefing.
Right.
You've got to be like alert. You have to know about like East. Jurist, you just have to know everything.
That's the other thing. You just have to know so much. Like with Congress, I felt like, all right, this is my story today, and I can focus on that. Now I feel like I have to focus on everything.
Yeah, and you have to know everything, and you have to know it well enough, especially like if you're doing a pool report. You can't be like, and then Jay spoke about something, and I don't really know what he said. Like that would be, and so.
Though that's how
and that
I
would
feel
come
sometimes.
out, but you have to know, and you have to listen to them talking and say, "Oh, wait a minute, that's news," because they won't.
Right.
He's not going to say. He might not all.
news.
Yeah, he may not always say, "Oh, and by the way, this is big news." You have to know it, and you have to like know enough about the different topics that you're doing. So it's just it's stressful. It's not, but it is. I mean, there's super perks to it, but it's also like.
Yeah, but it's sort of like, I'm trying to think of what it's like. You get to go all of these really cool places and be on this really cool plane, but it's not for you. It's like you're the roadie.
It sounds like they're not rolling out the red carpet for journalists, this administration at least. Like,
Well,
No,
but nobody.
I don't. Yeah, but they don't in Congress either. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just, you're just doing your job, and
Yeah, and we don't expect the red carpet.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you haven't asked one yet.
Yeah.
Just I want to when you were talking about sourcing, you say obviously you beat your regional contact. I mean, how much are folks who aren't authorized to talk to the press willing to have off-the-record coffees and then talk to you even though they're not authorized to talk to you? Because I mean, in Congress, I'll say on Capitol Hill, you just you run into people, and then you can say, "Oh, hey, nice to meet you. Let's get together sometime." And
Yeah.
you have,
Which
you
is
see people
which
everywhere.
is sort of why we underscore the importance of keeping those contacts in
So at
Congress.
the White House, I mean, how much are people willing to sit down and talk to you off the record?
So there are briefings. There are background briefings that that we get into, that NPR gets into, that sometimes are you guys into?
Yeah, occasionally, not always.
Yeah, I mean, there'll be these weird things where you get this email that's like, "Can somebody show up at 4:00?" And then you all get taken into a room, and then they give you information on background that is of marginal usefulness.
And it will often be repeated like 2 hours later if you're watching CNN. Somebody will
Yes.
go on and talk it on the record.
Yeah, but I feel like, but I'm new. I feel like this administration runs a pretty tight ship, and it turns out there just aren't even that many people who are in the know because the president keeps. I mean, it is a very tight circle
Centralized,
around
yeah.
the president, and I mean, cabinet secretaries don't know what the hell's going on. So it's really tough to penetrate that.
Yeah.
In any sort of meaningful way.
It's the hardest thing on the job is to get people to talk to you.
And I've had virtually no success, but I'm new.
I wanted to ask a follow-up to the idea of sort of the trade-off between perks and responsibilities, but not really about the perks, but it seems like what you guys get the best is access. Whatever access you get, that's gold to you, right? And it's hard to come by. So how do you juggle the pressures you were talking about, even like when you're asking a question, you want to ask a question that sort of fits in, you don't want to sort of throw it down a right turn or something. How do you hold them accountable in a way that doesn't mean you're not going to be on that next briefing next time, or they're not going to ever call you back, that kind of stuff? How do you balance that?
We get such little that I don't think it matters.
Yeah,
I mean, that's never a consideration. I mean, a lot of what we like to do is to sort of almost take what they say and check that, whatever claims they're making and check what claims they're making. But I don't think it's ever that. Never think, oh, well, if I write this, somebody's not going to talk to me. Never.
No, never. I don't worry about getting yelled at.
Yeah.
I don't worry about.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just trying to do good stories.
And I don't even know if they gave better access if you'd really worry about it.
Oh,
I mean,
no.
because you got people always know if they were. I mean, I think especially at this level or in Washington, people know like reporters and like they'll be their friend until they're like writing about them being indicted, and then maybe they'll send an email when they're in jail and ask them if they would still talk and give them their story. I think
But I mean, at the same time, like, I think we follow like general guidelines of journalism that say like, don't completely burn people for no reason.
Yeah.
But that's the same thing that you would do on any beat. And that doesn't mean go easy on people. It just means don't take like total cheap shots or like do a critical piece without asking for comment.
Right. But yeah, it's similar to any other beat.
It's just the regular rules of the road. Yeah.
I was talking to Sandra Ross, who I guess used to cover the White House for AP years ago. And one of the things she brought up was she was on a plane, after 9/11, or like just sort of immediately following, the attacks, and how like everybody on the plane was like a reporter. They were kind of like the B group of reporters for some reason, is how she described it, and like how they were all just didn't know really if they could even trust the president in terms of like, not the president, but just they were just sort of conscious of like, okay, they're telling us we're going one place, but what if we're actually going someplace else? And just sort of this sort of concern for their own safety and just sort of the information they were getting from the president in the midst of a very confusing, potentially dangerous situation. So, I mean, I don't know if that's come up again, but just,
9/11?
I don't feel like I don't recall it, but just sort of that sort of the fact that like you're sort of in Air Force One, you're trusting these people with not only, like information that you're reporting on, but also just sort of just your own safety, and what if in the event of a terrorist attack or something.
I don't know. My theory is that is the safest place on earth to be.
On the 10th anniversary when I was going, I called my mom and said, I'll be gone Sunday. I'm pool duty on Air Force One, September 11th, and she was, like flipped out. And I was like, Mom, are you kidding me? I'm on the safest place in Earth. Like, I mean.
Well, I guess her concern was that they were saying we're going to go here, but they were sort of like, well, what if we don't actually go there and land? And there was this sort of like feeling on the plane that maybe they were not being as transparent, because they wanted something reported a certain way, in terms of where they're like. Not that it actually happened, but that was the concern.
Yeah, they
ever that kind of similar.
As far as I remember, on September 11th, the initial September 11th, they split up the pool because I can't remember, but some people, and I think Jay got left. He was with Time at the time, and he got left behind. I know Ann Compton went. Wow. She continued, and I'm not sure who else. But yeah, I think that the pool. Some people got left in Texas or wherever he was, or
Florida.
No, I think they went to Texas. I think they flew to or New Mexico or some underground bunker or something. But I'm not.
Like how?
Yeah, we don't know any.
The heat of the moment. I mean, it was this is like an unprecedented.
Yeah, I was gonna say we've never had anything like that.
Yeah,
had never anything like
that was 9/11.
Of course, but just
yeah.
Natalie, can you talk a little bit about the dynamic between the different White House reporters in the press briefing room? I mean, if someone new comes in, is like what's that dynamic like? And then my follow-up question will be, in case one of you have something about it, what do White House correspondents come from? I mean, what do most of them report on before then? Is there anyone who's like new to reporting politics that comes into this beat?
I hope not.
Yeah.
So everyone's usually covered Congress?
Or something.
Yeah, I mean, it would be best to have covered something ahead of time. I think it's a very collegial place. I found it like super collegial.
Everybody's so welcoming.
Yeah.
So one's like, oh my gosh, like she never even did this and we did and now we're mad.
No,
because it's not like Mean Girls. It's it's okay.
No, people are very nice, and everybody has. I think it's also because you are. I mean, it's like being here. You guys all come here with a different background for one purpose. And so there's no judgment, and you're not. I mean, you compete, but I don't know if you've ever worked like if your college newspaper or or like other newspapers. You compete with people all my best friends are my competitors, you
Yeah.
know? I mean, I like all my friends who I know or work for other newspapers or news organizations, and it's very similar. I mean, people just get along. There's occasional people you don't get along with, but you know, you might not get along with a neighbor or
Right.
whatever. But it's very, but I do think that most people have had some political coverage experience
Yeah.
or like, you know, regional reporting, or they cover, a lot of people come over after covering the Hill.
Or they've covered the campaigns at least.
Yeah.
A lot of people come from the campaign.
Yeah, it'll change. Like after this next election, there'll probably be a whole new slew of people coming in to cover the next president.
But like you said, if they leak something, it's normally like to New York Times or to AP. Does that ever create any like friction, or are those reporters like ha ha ha?
No, because it's more the
No.
institution. It's more the
It's
institution.
not about
And
them.
but that's
Yeah.
really, right, 'cause they're going to
It's the institution that it goes to, and it's not always. I mean, I got something early a while ago.
I
Several
got something early, but
years
it was
ago.
super lame.
But mine was pretty good, but it was like I remember I was like so excited, and then like 2 hours later, everybody got it, and I was like, oh, that was not that big a deal. Like it was a big deal. It was a change in policy on a subject very close and dear to the Herald, but it was just like, okay, like, you know,
Do you have to go into like, oh shit?
It wasn't
mode
me.
When something is leaked, and you've got to like, when that happens, even though you know it's going to
you
happen.
go into oh shit mode like every day.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't. It's
Yeah.
pretty much my.
I'm curious how, we've seen sort of over the past few administrations, the White House has focused more on messaging and agenda setting, and sort of how you deal with that when, like, there's a leak. Odds are it's something that they, want out there to sort of shape the news agenda for the day. How do you deal with sort of dealing with their, the news that they want out there versus, the angle or enterprise story you might want to pursue?
Yeah, that's a great question. They this year have made a big push in women's equality and equal pay. And the president's like been hammering on that equal pay. And like after listening to him at a bunch of events earlier this year, my boss was like, he keeps saying this women only make 77 cents for the same job, and he was like, let's take a look at that. So we took a look, and we also pulled the White House salaries. I mean, people have done it since.
Yeah.
We pulled the White House salaries, and it is not a perfect science for like me, a reporter who can't balance her own checkbook, to like try to do this, but that was, that wasn't the story they wanted. We looked at their salaries, and they are exactly equal if you compare the same job, same person.
Yeah.
But that's not what he was saying. He was saying they make 77 cents for the same job. So, I mean, we looked at that, which is a way of just sort of taking what they say and saying, well, is that truly the case?
Yeah. I mean, we don't, sometimes I feel like if we hew too closely to their message, like, you've decided today is Women Job Day or whatever it is, then I feel like we're in some ways getting used. At the same time, he is the president of the United States, and when he does stuff, it's news. So it's sort of a constant balancing act.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Do you think that the amount of access that they're giving you to information and to the president allows you to do your job and allows them to do their job, or do you think that the balance is off right now? I mean, it seems like you're in a room and they're only going to tell you what they want to tell you, but in your mind, is that properly balanced?
I think that we're able to do our jobs because we get the information from different sources, but I wonder for them if it necessarily meets their needs, because they're not necessarily giving us stuff that would help it to explain it to people in their position. Like we don't like to use unnamed sources. Like, I mean, I don't think anybody does. No one
nobody
relishes.
likes
I mean,
to.
because it just, you can read an entire story and there's no names in it, and you're like, really? Did the reporter really talk to this person? I mean, so I think that an increased use of unnamed sources or sources close to the administration cuts their credibility. And I don't think it cuts ours, because we try to use that as little as possible. So, but yeah, I mean, if there can't be a name behind it, it just sort of, who is that really? I don't think it helps them.
No, it's also terrible on the radio.
Yeah.
Is he like even worse on the radio?
We've modified their voice.
Yeah.
No, well, no. What it ends up being is just like how much of the listener, how much of me do the listeners need to hear? Not that much.
Just to follow up on that, I don't cover the White House regularly, but there's times when I'm on these like press calls from the White House, and they'll be like, "Oh, this is Marissa Schultz from the White House," but you can't use Marissa Schultz. It'll be like on background from a White House official, even though you know that who this person is. And I wonder if there's like any pushback from you guys and who cover the White House regularly to really end that practice when there is, it's a broad phone call. It's not like you're doing something.
Yeah,
to
and
you.
There's lots of kvetching.
there's
for
lots
sure.
there's lots of complaining about it, and there's sometimes in person they'll be complaining about it, and then they'll always come back to us and say, "You agreed to show up. You knew what the ground rules were, and you said." So by showing up, you're giving your assent.
Though I feel like we sit outside and I hear the same conversation again and again. Like one of these times we're just not going to show up, and like if we all don't show up, and then somebody will be like, yeah, but somebody else will show up.
Yeah, it's just it's.
But also, if you all don't show up, how has the presence of the White House blog and the White House's Twitter account, and now that like everyone can kind of self-publish with Twitter and their own blogs, how much does that impact your job? I guess like knowing that you kind of need to play by their rules, because if not, they'll just put it out on their own.
Well, I mean, we don't have to play by their rules. I mean, yes, we have to.
You go. You decide not to show.
You can also go to which I think most people do, is go to those briefings
And then
use
not
them,
do anything.
And I've gone to them and they'll like a briefing, and I cannot write a story just based on somebody I cannot say whose name it is. I won't. I mean, it's just how do you know that I didn't just like make it up?
I go to those briefings and I say thank you very much for the information. It was valuable to see you people talk in person. I mean, this is what I think to myself, and it was sort of it was valuable to get this insight into your thinking or your spin. But I am absolutely not going to go run out and do a story. I'm not even going to run out and tweet.
Right.
I'm just.
Or
not,
you can use the information and then
Yeah,
say, hey,
and
so
then
the
build
White
a
House
story.
says they're talking about, whatever, more this or that, and so use that for reporting, but.
Yeah, I mean, there have been times where I've been super annoyed because, Vladimir Putin's people put out a readout on a call with the president, and I'm like emailing National Security Council staff saying like, do you have a readout? Like, what's going on here? Putin says they talked. And the response I get back is, well, you should have checked Twitter. I'm like, really?
Yeah. And there's a huge problem with them all the news organizations have been battling with them over allowing just a White House photographer into events and then sending that out. And so a lot of the news organizations have asked their, bureaus back home to not use the White House photos, unless it's like some, an event that for some reason it was only the White House photographer. But that's a huge problem. I mean, to just have the White House photographer, it's like state-run media.
We were talking about women, the whole women's issue that they've pushed. We did a story on that, and so I thought after attending a couple of those events, I wanted to talk to one of the people in the White House who were leading up that discussion. And so they agreed to give me an interview with a woman who's chairman of the White House Economic Advisory.
Oh, Betsy Stevenson.
But then 10 minutes before the interview, they wrote and said, now, we'd like for this to be on background. But if you interview her and you like what she says, then just, send us what you like, and then we'll negotiate over those quotes. And I called her back and said, I just don't see the value in that for us. It seems like a slippery slope. I mean, we might get a usable quote out of it, and they would have been able to give us probably some smart thinking. She's not a spokesperson. I mean, she's a player. But I just didn't want to use that in my story. It just wasn't important enough for me to make that deal. But on the other hand, I'm not covering the White House. I have the choice. We wrote 80 inches on it. We didn't use the White House. Big deal. But when you're in that orbit, do you feel like you make those deals? Are they worth it, or do they compromise you in some way? Or
I think they do. We have a basically a dictate at the bureau that we don't participate in those interviews when they offer them like that. When they offer an interview and then you can like pre-arrange the quotes before them, we don't do it. I mean, I've had interviews before though when I've talked to people and then they'll just say, can you tell me what you're going to use?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm happy to tell them what I'm going to use, but I'm not going to put it in writing and I'm not going to like submit it to them. I'll just say, yeah, I'm going to use that quote where you,
Or let
you know.
them edit it, or have a
Yeah,
veto.
yeah. No, that's a smart thing. They should definitely be discouraged from making those sort of deals.
What he said back was, he said, well, we just don't know, there's just too many people out there playing gotcha, and we don't know who we can trust. And I just think that's a...
That's yucky.
Especially since most of what they were going to say is so scripted that they like, you know, barely ever veer off script too much. So
Yeah, and I'm lucky in that for radio, like, people know they're being interviewed because there's a giant microphone in their face, and there's no, like, oh, let's negotiate that off and on because, like...
you could use that part.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've got it on tape. I'm going to use it. So it probably means that I get fewer sit-down interviews, but the ones I get, you know, I don't have any of that monkey business.
Yeah, no, that's good. I'm glad you did that.
Would you say that it is kind of common among your colleagues or other outlets to kind of fall prey to that sort of tactic? You know?
I have no idea.
I don't know, but I don't think so because that's actually been a big issue for newspapers, and I think the Times said that they wouldn't do it, and I think a number of outlets have said, and I think there's actually been a, what's that word, diminution in them trying to do that. I think the feedback from doing that was bad enough. I mean, you know, they send out press releases. It's just, you know, that's like sending out a press release essentially.
In the 5 minutes we have left, can we just circle back for a minute to the place where, Tamara, you were going to start to talk about sort of typical day
Yeah.
for a White House reporter. Maybe each of you could sort of...
So I was going to talk through the weekend, but that's just silly. Well, it was...
Well, because it's not typical, or...
Well, I mean, this was a particularly newsy weekend,
Yeah.
but I ended up, like, Saturday filing some spots when the Bergdahl thing came out. So, like, in the middle of the day while the kid was napping, I did some reporting and stuff. And then...
So from home.
From home. And we were pool, but all he did that was poolable was golf, and we don't pool golf because there's no radio use in pooling golf. And
golf
then...
is... Talk about the drawbacks on the job would be a pool duty and getting golf day.
Yeah, because you just sit in a van?
No, you actually get to go into the it's the like the PX at a military base. So there's like a what is it that
Roy Rogers. Or
yeah,
something?
Roy Rogers. There's like 3 or 4 of them, like Popeyes and a couple of other places.
Yeah.
But it's always
a cool golf cart.
yeah, you sit around for like 5 hours, and it's always a gorgeous day. And
Right.
you just bring it's good if it's a Sunday because you just bring the Sunday papers with you and read the papers. And although I did have pool duty once at a
pool.
At a pool, yeah, that was pretty awesome. And it was the country club in Fort Lauderdale where they filmed Caddyshack. So that was fun. So we got to send around like funny tweets. I went through their website and found like gopher golf balls and stuff like that. So.
Oh, so then...
My daughter's bat mitzvah, perhaps,
Yeah.
because that's where we have
Oh, really?
If I had known.
So then Sunday, we decided that I needed to do a little more of the Bergdahl stuff, but I was like trying to balance this with berry picking and going to the pool and stuff. So during nap again, I did a bunch of reporting, called sources, did stuff, and then after baby bedtime, before baby bedtime, I'm at the pool and I get an email saying, we need you to confirm the climate stuff. And then, failing to do that, and our environmental people are working on it too. And then after baby bedtime, from 8:30 until 10, I was working on writing up a Q&A for this morning, sort of getting all of my reporting into a written form. And then this morning at 5 a.m. I was on the radio. And there are days where you come in and for us, there's a story you're tweeting all day, you're filing news spots all day, so like the 45-second things, you do a couple of those during the day, have a story in the afternoon on All Things Considered that airs at 4 or 5, and then have to turn around and do another story, sometimes on a completely different topic, for Morning Edition the next day.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unbelievable how much it's changed. I mean, because like you were saying, you tweet all day about, you know, either at the briefing or different things the administration's doing, and then generally, like, I'll do a blog item on whatever topic of the day. I'll do a couple blog items because they give so many interviews to, like, you know, Access Hollywood, and the First Lady will talk about how one of the daughters is going to be driving now, or they'll just do like enough cute little things that people like to read about, so you want to put those up on the blog, so you do that, and then, or sometimes you have to do a first version of a story, and then you'll have to do a second version of a story, and it's just sort of, and you want to put a fresh top, because if you just wrote a blog item, you don't want that's been sitting on the, you know, homepage all day, so you want to like update and do something fresh, so.
Yeah, it's sort of just a constant stream of things, often completely unrelated to each other.
Yes.
Like one day last week, I was doing a story about the First Lady's fight over the school lunch standards. And then I was doing a news spot about the CIA station chief's name being leaked. And then I was doing a piece about Shinseki.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's head snapping.
Yeah.
Is there a final question or anything else we should know?
Not that I can think of. I was going to say you're all ready to go. Yeah.
That was really awesome.
And if you
Thank
don't,
you guys so
and if
much.
you are regional reporters and you don't know your regional person, it's good to get in touch. I think Keith Malley is head of that operation, and they're good people because they will. I mean, you can get in on like. Sometimes it's a great story that the, you know, whatever is, this school principal is coming for an award or something like that. It's a good opportunity to get into the White House and to see how things work, and every little bit helps to sort of make it easier for a time where you might come more routinely.
Yeah, I think just having attended some briefings and doing some other things like that before,
it was
having
super
done some
helpful
campaign
for me.
stuff, it was just sort of getting used to the filing from an airplane or filing from a bus, like that kind of thing.
Or the ground, or sitting outside, and every little bit helps. And you never get used to it, and like I was saying, I'm like freak out all the time over it. So, but
that makes me feel better, actually.
I've talked to people who've done it for years, and they say the same thing, that it just never. It's always, it's like you said, the best job and also the worst job. It's constant frustration and struggle. And
are you keeping notes for your books?
Most of mine are about the kid these days.
Well, we'd read that too. Lesley, thank you so much. Tamara, thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Let's take a
Thanks,
break.
guys.